Before we begin tonight's presentation, if we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for the sponsors of the Majlis, inshaAllah. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم أما بعد فقد قال أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك آمنا به صدق الإمام عليه السلام صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To continue our discussion that we've been having in the past few weeks, examining Dua Kumail and going into the expositions of the lines, the beautiful lines and the beautiful words of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. In tonight's discussion, when the Imam alayhi salam says, Allahumma aghfir li kulla dhanbin adhnabtu, O Allah, forgive all of the sins that I have committed. This is a beautiful conclusion of the second paragraph of the dua itself. In the first paragraph, the Imam alayhi salam approaches Allah, begs Allah using His divine names and His attributes, builds up his hajat. In the second paragraph, he tells Allah Subhanahu wa Taala what exactly his hajats are, to forgive all of the different types of sins that exists in this world. And there are about 8 categories, roughly, of sins that the Imam alayhi salam begins to discuss. When you refer to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam in other riwayat, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam goes into length and he expands on the different types of sins more than what Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam does so here. So the Imam alayhi salam, he turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, forgive those sins which blocks my dua, forgive those sins which attracts niqam, punishing adversities. Ya Allah, forgive my sins which brings about bala on a social level, the bala that doesn't just affect me, but affects the brothers and sisters in the community. Ya Allah, forgive the sins which changes my blessings. And Ya Allah, forgive the sins which kills the hope that resides in my heart. As I said, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam goes on to length in other narrations and other du'as as well, the other types of sins which has other effects within our lives, spiritual effects in our lives. But the Imam alayhi salam keeps the discussion short. And to keep the discussion, or to keep the dua eloquent and more beautiful, he keeps this limited to these amount of sins. And then he concludes the discussion by saying, كُلَّ ذَنْبٍ أَذْنَبْتُ, forgive all of the sins that I have committed. وَكُلَّ خَطِيئَةٍ أَخْطَأْتُهَا, and all of the mistakes that I have committed in my life. And what's amazing is that here, this is a principle that has been extracted from the Quran. That regardless of how heavy my sins are in terms of the quality of these sins, in terms of the quantity of these sins, my hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiving all of these sins should never depreciate, should never be taken away from me. And when you refer to the ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully says, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. O my ibad, O my servants, those who have performed asraf extensively on your nufus, on yourselves, on your souls, لَا تَقْنُطُ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not despair from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of us, because of the lifestyles that we have, because of the sins that we perform daily, in and out, every single day, you find that we tend to lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We question whether Allah will look towards us with mercy and compassion, with love, or would He turn to us with, for example, hatred and punishment. Say no, the ayah of the Quran is clear. لَا تَقْنَطُ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not have qunut, do not despair in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not despair that His mercy will shower upon you. He will forgive you and forgive all of your sins that you have committed, regardless of how many you have committed or how grave these sins are in nature. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا. That Allah indeed forgives all of the sins. As long as I am alive in dunya, regardless of how heavy these sins are, Allah has the capacity and the power to forgive all of the sins and the effects of these sins in my life. Even Wahshi, the killer of Hamza, his heart trembled when he saw how powerful the Muslims had become. That when he heard this verse, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله, or when he heard the Muslims saying amongst themselves that there is no one merciful as the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Muhammadin al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he comes towards the courts of the Holy Prophet. The Prophet looks towards him and says, are you Wahshi, the one who murdered and assassinated my uncle Hamza in the Battle of Uhud? He says, I am Wahshi, the one who murdered your uncle and assassinated him in the Battle of Uhud. They say Rasul Allah, the narrations explain that Rasul Allah, he forgives Wahshi. And he overlooks his mistake and he lets him go, under the condition that Wahshi was never to show his face in the presence of the Holy Prophet. He says, Wahshi, I free you. And you are no longer a prisoner of this religion or my prisoner. And he lets him go. So even someone like Wahshi, who was seen as the assassinator of the beloved uncle of Rasulullah, Hamza, you find that even the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was extended towards him. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear. وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And who is there to forgive the sins except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's a beautiful narration. They say one day, Rasul Allah, he began to perform dua. And in this performance of dua, he says, Ya Kareem al-Af. Oh, the one who is honorable and the one who overlooks the mistakes of others, referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They say Jibreel came down, descended upon the Holy Prophet and said, Ya Rasul Allah, do you know what is the tafsir of this verse? Ya Kareem al-Af. It says, Ya Kareem al-Af means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will look towards His servant, the sinful servant, and He will take his sins, He will take his sayyi'at, his mistakes, and He will transform them, and He will convert them to goodness, towards hasanat. And this is a meaning that has been derived from the Holy Quran. إِلَّا مَنْ تَابَ وَعَمَلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا فَأُولَٰئِكَ يُبَدِّلَ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ حَسَنَاتٍ. And those who turn and revert back to Allah, asking for forgiveness, وَآمَنَ, and they believe, وَعَمِلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, and they do good, they act righteousness in this life, Allah will take all of their sayyi'at, all of their evil, and convert them towards good. Imagine on the Day of Judgment when we open our books. When I open my books, I will read through all of my deeds and misdeeds. And I will come towards some of the deeds and I will turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, I never performed these good deeds. Allah will say, I took some of your misdeeds and I converted them and I transformed them so that they become good deeds. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's most definitely important that we never lose hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a different narration, they say, it is said that when a person performs istighfar, Allah looks towards this ibad and He turns to His angels and He says to His angels, look at this ibad of mine, this servant of mine. He has violated my law. He has committed a sin. He has performed dhulm on himself. But despite violating my law, my divine law, he knows that there is no one to turn to except me. He knows that there is no one there to remove the burdens of these sins from his shoulders except for me. O angels, testify that now is the time that I have forgiven this ibad of mine. And this is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through this mercy, the Imam alayhi salam says, Allahumma ghfir kulla dhanbin adhnabtu. All of the sins that I have performed, forgive them and remove the effects and the athar of these sins from my life. Wa kulla khati'atin akhta'tuha. And all of the mistakes that I have made in my life. Yes, scholars, they came forward and they said there are two types of mistakes. Khati'a literally means an error, a mistake. Something that is in opposite to what is known as sawab. Sawab means something which is right. Khati'a is something which is wrong, a mistake or an error. They say there are two types of khati'a, khata. The first is something which is done knowingly through ilm. I know that this particular deed is wrong and I still go ahead and I perform it because my desires dictates that I should perform these different types of actions. But then there is the second type of khati'a, which is what? Which is known as something which is performed ignorantly, something which is performed out of my ignorance. I may perform a particular mistake without knowing that it's considered to be a mistake. And you find that the Imam alayhi salam, when he summarizes the whole discussions of sins and the effects of sins, what he is saying is, Ya Allah, forgive all of the sins that I have committed in my life, knowingly or unknowingly, out of ilm or out of jahala or out of ignorance. The sins when I performed when I was young, the sins which I perform when I am old, the sins which are small and the sins which are big, the sins which are considered to be overlooked, in the sense that these sins are so minor that they have no athar in my life, that you take them and you convert them towards good, or the sins which have public consequences. All of the sins that I have performed, Ya Allah, forgive them and release me from them. And then he goes on to explain. He says in this beautiful next paragraph, he begins the next paragraph by saying, Allahumma inni atakarrabu ilayka bidhikrik. Ya Allah, now is the time that I commit myself in moving towards you. This paragraph, this sentence of this, the opening sentence of this paragraph is beautiful. And it's profound in its nature. And the context of it changes altogether. Remind yourselves of the first paragraph of Dua Kumail. The Imam begs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His divine names and His divine attributes. In the second paragraph, he begs Allah to forgive him all the different types of sin. But that's not it. The Imam in the third paragraph now begins to speak about the commitments of how a person should perform istighfar. Istighfar is not just performed by sitting back, relaxing and saying, Ya Allah, these are the sins that I have committed. Forgive my sins. No, there is a commitment that is associated with it as well. That a person should take the first step of forgiveness in moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's saying, Ya Allah, I am now willing to turn a new leaf in my life. I am now willing to change my life. I am now willing to move on to the new chapters of my life. where I abandon my sins and I move towards you. أتقرب إليك. How? بذكرك, by your remembrance. So there's two concepts here. Let's examine these two concepts one after the other. The first concept is known as the qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever we perform ibadat, all of us should perform our ibadat with the intention of qurbatan ilallah, that we seek the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not confined physically. We don't move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala physically. We move towards Allah spiritually. We move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our hearts, not from our limbs and our bodies. In the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not physical, confined to space and time, that we move towards Him. Because our understanding of Tawheed is that Allah can never be physical. Because if He is physical, then He is confined. And if He is confined, then He is no longer a God. Because there are rules that overpower Him. In fact, He is the one who has ascertained the laws of time and space. He is above time and space. He has constituted time and space in dunya, whereas He Himself is free from the constraints of dunya. He is not physical, rather He is spiritual. And that's why when the ayah of the Holy Quran beautifully, eloquently speaks of how close He is towards the human being, it is not confined on a physical understanding. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than what our minds can comprehend, but of a spiritual understanding. Ya ibadi alladhina, the ayah of the Holy Quran, إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, that when they ask about me, Ya Rasul Allah, tell them that I am near. فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. There's an interesting narration associated with this verse of the Holy Quran. They say in the time of the Holy Prophet, when Rasul Allah began to speak about the concept of dua and how a person should perform dua, the adab of dua, and one of the adabs of dua that is of course often discussed by the ulama is that a person should keep his voice low, soft, such that, especially when he's in public, such that the people around him are not able to understand the problems that this person is going through. So when I'm, for example, in the community, in the midst of the community, there are brothers around me or sisters around me, and in the night of Qadr, it is the night of dua, I should not call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a loud voice. I should keep my hajat soft. The reason being is because these are my problems, and I should not disclose my problems to the people around me, because this will somehow bring about humiliation in the eyes of others, of my status, of my position. And so one of the adabs of performance of dua is that I should keep my voice soft. In the time of the Holy Prophet, the people used to do the opposite. The people, what they would do is they would call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loudly. They would shout, they would scream, they would move their hands erratically. You know, when a person in a state of desperation, how they behave, they are desperate to have this particular problem removed from them. And so they act erratically. I'm sure some of you, those of you who have gone for ziyarah, for example, in the dhari of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in the dhari of Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, you find when you come across certain individuals who shout, who scream, they move in a very unpredictable way. May Allah help them and alleviate their problems from them and their lives. You find that this is how the Arabs of Mecca used to behave, upon which the Holy Prophet turned to them and said to them, do not behave in this way, do not scream, do not shout, because indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close to you than what your minds can understand. They say as a group of the ashab, they came towards the Prophet and they said to him, they said, Ya Rasul Allah, having said what you've just said, Rabbuna, our Lord, Ahuwa Kareeb, is He close to us? Fanunaji, that we perform munajat, that we whisper to Him. Or is He far from us, that we, fanunadi, that we call out to Him in a loud voice? Upon which the ayah was revealed. إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. If they ask concerning me and my position, then tell them that I am indeed near. That there's no need for them to shout, there is no need for them to scream. Let them speak on a soft voice, and I will know what is in their hearts. And the idea of this, the idea behind this, is that when we speak about the closeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the human being, Allah is indeed close. And this closeness is understood to be of a spiritual essence. But there's a difference here. There's a difference between Allah being close to the human being and the human being being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is close to me. There's no shadow of a fact in that. There's no shadow of a doubt in that. But am I close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's a different discussion altogether. Here Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam explains that a human being may be far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the sins that he commits. The sins that we commit, the sins that have been laid down by the Sharia, by the divine legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every time I perform these sins, it moves me away from Allah. It creates a gap between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I seek istighfar is one of the ways in which I try to close this gap that exists between me and Allah. But the idea behind this is that a sin creates a gap, a fasila between me and Allah, where I move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah is always close to me, but I may not be close to Him on a spiritual level, on a spiritual understanding. But then the Imam alayhi salam, he says, Allahumma inni atakarrabu ilayk. I am now moving towards you. With the commitment of abandoning my sins, I am moving towards you. How? Through number one, bidhikrik, through your remembrance. And so now, we open the discussion of what is the meaning of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama came forward and said that there are 4 understandings of the word dhikr. Let's look at this one by one. The first meaning of the word dhikr, they say dhikr encompasses all acts of ibadat. Every act of ibadat that I perform, from the mustahabbat, from the wajibat, or even abstaining from the makruhat and the haram, muharramat, all of this is seen as ibadat. Whether I engage in qira'at al-Quran, whether I engage, for example, in performing ziyarat, whether it's performing hajj, whether it's performing sadaqah, whether it's me abstaining from ghiba or tuhma, whether it's me abstaining from zina or consuming alcohol or listening to music, all of this is seen as ibadat. And when I engage in ibadat, it is seen as the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira. O you who believe, engage in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in abundance. And that's not necessarily when it comes to just performing the dhikr the way we understand dhikr, but on a practical level, that I engage in performing that which is wajib and abstaining from that which is haram. This is the practical establishment of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second interpretation of the word dhikr is when I perform the dhikr, when I call out the names and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Famously, these are known as what? At-tahleel, when I, for example, engage in the recitation of La ilaha illallah, or takbir, Allahu Akbar, or tasbih, Subhanallah. Many of us, we tend to do this, yes? We tend to perform tasbih. The tasbih of Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha, is a fundamental example in this area. Whenever scholars speak about the concept of the dhikr, they go on to explain the famous narration that when Az-Zahra was weak one day, when she had become tired from performing all of the chores in her home, she comes towards the Prophet of Islam and she says, Ya Rasul Allah, Ya Abata, give me one servant that is able to help me in the house. Upon which the Prophet says, I will give you something far more stronger and far more effective. And she says, what is it? And then, of course, the narration explained to us that he gives her the tasbih of Fatima Zahra, which was known as the tasbih of Fatima Zahra. When a person engages in the recitation of Allahu Akbar and Alhamdulillah and Subhanallah, You find that when a person engages in this types of dhikr, in this types of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it strengthens them spiritually. There's a fundamental and a very beautiful discussion, a very profound discussion amongst the ulama, which explain that when a person engages in the dhikr, when a person strengthens himself spiritually, that spiritual strength is seen and projected physically. That Fatima al-Zahra, when she engages in this tasbih, it spiritually strengthens her, which is then seen in her life physically. That it physically then gave her strength to move on. That whenever we act and we engage in ibadat, that ibadat has spiritual significance in our hearts, which is then seen on a physical level as well. So now here scholars, they came forward and they explained that when a person engages in the dhikr and the remembrance of Allah by calling out to Him, using His names, Ar-Rahman, Al-Malik, or for example, using the different attributes like La ilaha illallah and Subhanallah and so on and so forth. The idea behind this is that I slowly incorporate within my lives this message that I am using, these formulas that I am calling out. I understand intellectually that these names, the asma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are the manifestations of perfection. And that whenever I call out to Allah using His divine names, I need to incorporate within my lives these attributes as well. The very famous hadith of the Holy Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says, تَخَلِّقُ بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, and clothe yourselves, adapt within your lifestyle, embed within your lifestyle the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? It means that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, then I need to be Ar-Rahman in my life as well. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving, then I need to be forgiving as well, especially to those who have wronged me in my life. If Allah is Sattar al-Uyub, if Allah is the one who conceals the defects of others, then I need to be able to conceal the defects of others, especially when I come across something, I come to know something that not everyone else knows, something which is private and personal about others. I need to keep it within myself and not disclose that information to the people of the community. And so the second meaning of the dhikr of Allah is when I engage in the remembrance of Allah using His asma and using His different qualities and attributes. The third meaning of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Holy Quran itself. The Holy Quran is labeled as dhikr. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّ لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. That indeed we have revealed the remembrance, the dhikr, which is known as the Quran. وَإِنَّ لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. And we are the ones who protect the Quran. The Quran, our interaction with the Quran resembles our interaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An interaction of the Holy Quran doesn't just mean, for example, carrying the Quran as a ta'weez. Some of us, for example, we have the entire Quran locked in a silver locket and we carry it wherever we go. We believe that it will protect us. Some of us, we carry the Quran in our cars. We make sure that there is a nuskha, there is a copy of the Quran within our cars. So wherever we go, we carry the Quran with us. That's not the meaning of having an interaction or having an association with the Quran, a relationship with the Quran. What is meant by having a relationship with the Quran is to have a relationship with the meanings and the words of the Holy Quran. That every time I read the Quran, I embed within my lifestyle the message of the personalities that are there mentioned within the Quran. That I follow the Sharia that is there preserved within the Quran. That is the meaning of having a relationship with the Holy Quran. That the more I interact with the Quran, the more I remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran has two realities. There is the physical reality that is just like any other book. The Quran is a book. It has pages, it has ink, and just like any other book in the world. But there is a spiritual essence behind the Quran that we tap into whenever we associate ourselves with the physical Quran. لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Yes, sahih, the Quran is just like any other book. But I cannot treat it like it is like any other book. I cannot touch its words unless I am in the state of purity and purification. I cannot treat it like it is just like any other book. I cannot throw it on the floor. I cannot place it on the floor. I cannot place other things on top of it. Why? Because it is sanctified. It is known as the kitab, not just any kitab. It is known as the kitab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because it is associated with Allah, it is sanctified. It is made glory. It is made honorable. It is made spiritual. And to the state or to the extent that its spiritual powers is there within its words. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. That if this Quran was to be revealed on a mountain, the physical Quran, no, far from it. If the spiritual power of the Quran was to be revealed on the mountain, you would see this mountain explode into tiny, fine particles because of the power that it carries. Look at the heart of the human being. Every time we commit a sin, it hardens our heart. بَلْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً. It makes it harder than the rocks of this world. What melts the rockness or the hardness of the rocks of this world? Tilawat al-Quran. If the Quran has the power to demolish and disintegrate an entire mountain, imagine the power it has on a hardened heart. And that's why the scholars, they came forward and they say, engage in the tilawah of the Holy Quran, because it softens the hardened heart. It makes the heart soft, that we start to feel empathetic towards others. We start to cry, and the tears are able to flow from our eyes. But that initiative has to be from us first and foremost, that I engage in the recitation of the Holy Quran, and then I adopt and I integrate the message and the principles and the disciplines of the Holy Quran within my life. When you look at, for example, the Holy Prophet, يَتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, that he engaged in the tilawah of the Holy Quran. He engaged with his community with the recitation of the Holy Quran. That's why the scholars, they came forward and they said that the revolution of the Holy Prophet first of all began with the recitation of the Holy Quran. That he was able to transform an entire community, bring them towards the path of Islam through tilawat al-Quran. The Arabs of Mecca, they were jealous because the Quran was revealed unto the Prophet. They used to go around saying, لولا نزل هذا القرآن على رجل من القريتين العظيم. Why was this Quran not revealed to a man of importance? Why was this Quran revealed to a man, a shepherd like Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam? The Quraysh of Mecca were jealous because of the power of the Holy Quran. And we need to try and reinforce this power within our lives. So this was the third interpretation, that when the Imam alayhi salam says, أَتَكَرَّبُ إِلَيْكَ بِذِكْرِكَ, he says, I am indeed seeking closeness to you, Ya Allah, through the Quran. The fourth interpretation, salah, is what is known as the dhikr. That in the Holy Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully says, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةِ لِلذِّكْرِ, and stand and establish salah in my remembrance. That salah is one of the most profound ways of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've discussed the importance of salah in our previous discussions, in the previous weeks, that a person should engage and establish salah in his life. And of course, just as important, a person should engage and establish salah fi awwal al-waqt, in its prime time, in its opening time. And a person should never delay his salah. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. And there are those who remember Allah standing, and there are those who remember Allah sitting, and there are those who remember Allah when they are lying on their sides. The fuqaha took inspiration from this verse, saying that a person should never neglect his salah. That if a person is not able to pray salah standing, then he should pray sitting. And if he is not able to pray sitting, then he should pray on his back. or lying on his side, but salah should never be abandoned. More so than this, salah should always be prayed on time. Look at those who have neglected their salah. Look at those who delay their salah. They say to themselves that it is hard to repay and perform the qada of the salah that we have missed. Yes, salah, some of us, we think that praying on time is a burden on us. It is more of a burden when we delay our salah outside of its time. Just ask those who have years of salat al-qada that they have to perform. The fourth meaning of al-dhikr is salah, that the Imam says, أَتَكَرَّبُ إِلَيْكَ بِذِكْرِكَ, that I seek proximation towards you, Ya Allah, through salah. And of course, the final meaning is what is known as dhikr, is known as the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. When the man came towards the Imam alayhi salam, as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and asked the Imam, Ya Aba Abdullah, what is the tafsir of فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and ask the people of dhikr if you do not know. He says, Wallah, nahnu wallah, Ahl al-Dhikr. We are the ones who are considered to be Ahl al-Dhikr, the Ahl al-Bayt, alayhim as-salam. That if a person wants to understand the true message of Islam, its true principles, its true disciplines, then refer back to the Ahl al-Bayt. And therefore, when we turn our minds towards what happened in Karbala, you find that Karbala was a manifestation of how people turned away from the Ahl al-Bayt. Especially the people of Kufa. When Abi Abdullah alayhi salam sends his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil to go and to rally the people against Ibn Ziyad and to rally the people against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, you find that the people, when they saw the viciousness, when they saw the terror and the deceit of Ibn Ziyad, they began to betray Muslim ibn Aqil. They moved away from him. When Muslim ibn Aqil was all alone in the streets of Kufa, the men, they came towards him, the army of Ibn Ziyad, and they began attacking him. He fought, and he fought bravely, just like his uncle Ali ibn Abi Talib. But he was overpowered, and when he was overpowered, they say they dragged him towards the palace of Ibn Ziyad. And when you refer to the narrations, there is a dialogue that takes place between Ibn Ziyad and Muslim ibn Aqil. And in the end, finally, when Ibn Ziyad orders the neck of Muslim to be struck, for his head to be severed, just before the sword is struck, he lifts his head and he faces towards Karbala and he calls out, Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya ibn Rasul Allah, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullah. And then the head or the neck of Muslim is struck and his head is severed from his body. Does it stop there? It doesn't stop there. But they take the body of Muslim and they throw it from the palace of Ibn Ziyad. The body lands on the ground in the midst of the bazaar. They came and they roped his leg. They tied his leg with ropes and they began to drag him in the streets of Kufa, serving as a message to all those who opposed Ibn Ziyad, that this would be their fate, that his body was humiliated, the way the body of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam was humiliated. When it was buried under the hooves of the horses on the 10th of Muharram, and how his body was not given ghusl, and how his body was not given kafan, and how his body laid in the sands of Karbala for 3 days. Until Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam enters the gates of Karbala, enters the city of Karbala to bury the body of his father. They say that when Muslim sends his salam to Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, Abi Abdullah, as he is entering the gates of Al-Tha'labiyya, he turns towards Kufa randomly, out of the random, And he responds to this salam, alayka minni salam, and he cries, فَبَكَى بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. He then turns to Zainab and he says, "Oh my sister Zainab, indeed Ibn Ziyad has commanded that the neck of Muslim is to be struck. Indeed Ibn Ziyad has slaughtered our cousin Muslim Ibn Aqil." And they cried extensively. His beard was drenched in his tears and the tears began to flow from his eyes. He then says to Zainab, "Oh my sister Zainab, summon the family of Muslim, summon the family of Aqil." Zainab, she goes and she begins to summon all of the family members of Aqil. But there was one daughter in particular, a young daughter by the name of Hamida. Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, he goes and he sits alongside Hamida. He says to Hamida, "Oh Hamida," he begins to caress her hair, he begins to stroke her head. Hamida, she begins to cry and she says, "Ya Abu Abdullah, ibn Rasul Allah, why do you stroke my hair? Why do you stroke and caress my hair the way you caress the hairs of the orphans? What has happened to my father, Ya Abu Abdullah?" Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. If we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all our marhumin, inshaAllah, Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha.